Hey, it's either Friday or Sunday, depending on how you look at it. Where I'm sitting right now, technically it's Sunday, but I did not do a live stream today because I'm actually up north and I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan on the Keweenaw Peninsula in a little town called Laurium, and I'll show you a photograph of where I'm sitting. I'm actually on the balcony of the Laurium Manor Inn in Laurium, which is near Calumet, and it's a really beautiful place to stay. And the reason I'm here is that I actually was invited to come up and speak, and I spoke last night to a group of people who are trying to raise money to build a statue to a woman named Big Annie Clements. And I wrote about her in my book about the Italian Hall disaster called Death's Door. And she was a leader among the strikers in 1913. For those who don't know, I wrote a book about the Italian Hall disaster, which happened during the strike of 1913. And so I talked a lot about the strike and everything that happened in the strike. And one of the major figures was a woman named Annie Clements, who was married to a striking miner, but she led many of the events that were important at that time. And so, for instance, she would lead parades and pickets through town, and then she also, for instance, would lead funerals. And she was actually the one who organized the event at the Italian Hall on Christmas Eve 1913. And so they're now trying to raise money to build a statue to her, which is a cause that I'm 100% behind because I think she's a hero and she needs to be remembered. So I spoke last night at a fundraiser, which is a lot of fun. And one of the interesting things is that I invited a bunch of my friends in the area, many of whom had never met each other. And the organizer said, "Hey, Steve, we're gonna have a table with your name on it right up front, so you can sit up there and enjoy yourself." And the card on it said, "Steve Lehto, family." And the table was full of people, none of whom were related to each other, and actually, just friends of mine, many of whom hadn't met each other previously. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a great time. But so we did that last night, and then today I did what I like to do whenever I'm up in the area. I visit a lot of my friends and businesses that sell my books. So, for instance, there's Copper World in Calumet. There's a Minnetonka in Copper Harbor. I dropped off some books, signed a bunch of books. In fact, in Copper World in Calumet yesterday, it's kind of funny. While I was dropping off books, people would walk by and see me signing books at the front counter because I'm signing them to put them into inventory. And I think we sold 3 books while I was standing there. So that was fun. And then today, ran up to Copper Harbor and dropped off some books at the Minnetonka, which is my other favorite place up here. I always talk about Copper Harbor being one of my favorite places on the planet, and it is. It's just this neat little town out in the middle of the end of the Keweenaw Peninsula. It's become a mountain biking mecca, but it's just a beautiful place. And while there, also ran up to the top of Brockway Mountain Drive. I shot some film up there, which I'll probably put up as just a different video on this channel. And then also shot some other footage. Was driving around near Calumet, which is just about a mile that way. Interesting fun fact is that Red Jacket was the original name of what is now Calumet, and this town of Laurium used to be called Calumet, but everyone called the area Calumet. So finally they changed the name of Red Jacket to Calumet, and then the name of Calumet was changed to Laurium. So this Laurium Manor Inn bed and breakfast I'm in right now was built in 1906 or 1908, right around there, around the same time that the Italian Hall was built. But it's just this beautiful, opulent mansion that was built by one of the big copper barons of sorts. And I know the owners of the place. It's a really cool place. You can check them out on the internet. They've got a great website and so on. But was driving around out just exploring like I always do. And I've been coming to Keweenaw Peninsula since I was a little kid. And I had relatives up here and many friends up here, of course. And ever since I've been coming up here, I always think that, like, oh, I've seen it all, I know it all. And comically, I always discover things or see things that I was not expecting. And so, for instance, today, and again, I'll post video of this, the tallest waterfalls in Michigan are the Douglas Houghton Falls. And they're just outside of Laurium. And I've been there before. They're kind of hard to get to. And they're actually not a big waterfall like, say, the Quamanon Falls. But they are spectacular in how far they fall. And the Douglas Houghton Falls, of course, are named after Douglas Houghton, the explorer, who I also wrote a book about called Michigan's Columbus. And interestingly, we don't know that if he ever actually saw the falls. We just know that they're named after him because somebody said, hey, we should name these after somebody important. And he was a geologist, so why not? But when he was passing through this area, say in 1841, 42, 43, in 1840, I don't know that he would have gone that far inland to explore because there weren't that many roads up here at that time. And he spent most of his time exploring around the shorelines. And he would have, of course, gone to Copper Harbor. We know that. Eagle River, and so on. But for him to have gotten in far enough to see the falls that now bear his name, I don't know that he ever did that. And there's no record that he ever actually did that I know of. But they're a fascinating set of waterfalls. And what's cool about it is that they were on private property for the longest time. And the only way you could see them, in theory, was to jump a fence. And it made it very difficult to see them. And my understanding is that the guy who owned the property had simply put up the no trespassing signs on the fence because he was tired of people coming onto the property and climbing up and down the falls and getting stuck and calling for help and police rescues and helicopters and 911. And it was kind of like, I don't think he minded so much that people wanted to see the falls. He just didn't want it to become a pain or a liability. And so a few years ago, they announced that the state of Michigan was going to buy the property, create access to it, and then do something with it to where people can go out and enjoy it. And in the footage I'm going to show you, you'll see that getting out there is rather easy. It's a trail. But what's cool is this: I was I was just driving around, exploring as I often do, and I'm driving down the road where those falls are, and I had kind of forgotten that they said that they'd acquired the waterfalls and the property they're on. And I saw out of the corner of my eye a little sign that says DH Falls, Douglas Houghton Falls. And there was a car parked next to it. So I spun around, parked, and I got out and I filmed my walk in. And I noticed, for instance, that the walk in was much longer than it would have been if you had jumped the fence. Not that I'd ever recommend you do that. However, walked in, shot some great footage, and apparently they are getting ready to prep it more. So right now it's not developed in any way. There's simply a footpath in that's marked. But there is a footpath in, and it takes you around the top where the falls are. And then you can see the waterfalls, but you really can't get a good view of the front of the falls. I took one of these cameras and put it on a really, really long selfie stick and held it out like this to get the best shot I could of try to see what the face of the falls look like. I don't know if I succeeded yet because I haven't yet checked that footage, but I think I got a decent shot of it. But it was kind of cool because like I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go look at the waterfalls. I was simply driving from the Calumet Laurium area down to Lake Linden and that area, and wound up having lunch at one of my favorite places on earth to eat up here. In particular, is a place called Quincy's. And my understanding is that Quincy's restaurant was established by a guy who worked for the Quincy mine, and of course up here the two big mines are the Calumet Hecla and the Quincy, and so there's all kinds of copper mining memorabilia and stuff around inside the restaurant on the walls, and there's like almost like a little, it's not quite a museum, but there's cabinets filled with really, really cool mining stuff inside the front doors when you step in there. So that was pretty cool. And then I mentioned a couple years ago my mother passed away, and the funeral was up here. And so I went to the cemetery today to actually visit her grave for the first time since the funeral. And so that was something I wanted to do as well. So spent some time out there. My grandfather and grandmother are buried there as well, and it's the Lakeside Cemetery in Hancock, where they've also got Big Louis Moilanen is buried there, who was the Copper Country giant, who was a big Finnish guy who lived in the Hancock area a long time ago, and is well known for how big he was, just a huge, huge guy. But getting back to Big Annie was 6'2", and very, very determined in what she was doing. And I'm being buzzed by bees right now, so if I disappear with a scream, you know what happened. But Big Annie, Annie Clements, was 6'2", and that's why they called her Big Annie, or they sometimes called her Tall Annie. But she had a 10-foot flagpole with a gigantic American flag on it, and she would lead the parades or the funerals or whatever it was that she was out there marching. She almost always had this gigantic flag and flagpole with her, and she was, fighting for workers' rights and so on. And the Italian Hall disaster happened on Christmas Eve, 1913, And that kind of took the steam out of the workers and the strikers. And they went back to work in April, and they basically tore up their union cards and voted to go back to work. And so the strike itself didn't succeed in that sense here in Calumet. But of course, it was one of the things that led to legislation that would later on come along to protect the unions and so on. And so I like to say that they may have lost the battle, but they won the war, and that is for workers' rights. And one other interesting thing I'm going to mention at the thing I spoke at last night, the gala, was that there was two tables of people who were descendants of Big Annie's, who came up from the Chicago area to attend this event. And I think they've told people this, but there was a book written about Big Annie a couple years ago by a guy named Lyndon Comstock. And if you're interested in the story, read his book. It's wonderful. And he was doing research on Big Annie, trying to find out what we knew about her, because in my book, I kind of ended with, I knew that she left the area and moved to Chicago after the events of the strike. So in 1914, she moves to Chicago, and that's the last I heard of her. And Lyndon Comstock was doing research, and he discovered that some of her descendants were still around, and he tracked them down and called a couple of them. And one of them said, "Big who? Annie Clements? Now, why are you studying my great-grandmother?" And he explained to them who Big Annie was and how important she was. And they're like, "Oh, really?" And so they really helped him write his book. They provided photographs, and he filled in a lot of the blanks in the story and wrote a book about her. And there were 18 or 19 people here last night who are related to her in one way or another, descendants of hers. And I met a young lady, for instance, who just graduated from law school, who is, I believe, great granddaughter of Big Annie. And of course, she wouldn't have known that if that book hadn't gotten written and Lyndon hadn't done that research. So it's very, very cool. It's amazing how this stuff works. I finished my book originally, the first draft of my book, in 2006. And the book got published, and I thought, okay, this is it. I'm going to now move on to my next topic. I wrote a book about Douglas Houghton, but I continued speaking about my books. And everywhere I went and spoke, somebody would come up to me and tell me something new. And I had people bringing me things and documents and stuff I'd never seen before. And so in 2013, I updated my book, and it almost doubled in size because of how much information I added that I'd gained. And a lot of it I simply gained because people brought it to talks I gave. So it turns out that some of these jobs you get, tasks you do, you think they're over and they're not, and they actually will follow you for life. So I was talking to somebody last night after I gave my talk, and I said, I wrote this book about the Italian Hall disaster so long ago, and I honestly thought, okay, that was an interesting topic. I'm glad I wrote it. Now I'll move on. And here I am. Let's see now. I could do the math. 18, 16, something like that, 16 or 18 years later, still talking about it. And I have a feeling I ain't going to stop talking about it anytime soon, simply because it's just keeps coming back up again and back up again. And so now it's trying to raise money to build this statue of Big Annie and place it in Calumet so that she'll be remembered. And I think it's important, because if you go to Calumet today, you'll find some signs of the strike and of the Italian Hall, for instance. And so you can go to the site where the Italian Hall was, and there's an arch there. They saved the arch, but the building is gone. There's a historical marker and some signage that explains the story. And then if you step about 20 feet one way and look, you can see the Calumet Theater, which is the building, and attached to it is the Village Hall. And in that building is where they actually took the victims of the Italian Hall. And that's actually where the event was held last night. And so we were actually in the same building where they had 73 victims laid out in the Italian Hall disaster aftermath on Christmas Eve, 1913. So again, like I said, I keep thinking, okay, it's time for me to move on. I've got another project here, another project there. I got to be used to doing something else. No. Some things will stay with you, but I don't mind. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining at all. And in fact, all I can hope is that I can do more to help them get this statue to Big Annie erected. And once that's done, I don't know what'll happen next, but I'm sure something will. So I'm going to pan the camera around in just a second to show you. But again, like I said, I'm up on the balcony of the Laurium Manor Inn in Laurium, which is just across the road from Calumet, which is where the Italian Hall disaster took place. And this is right dead center. We're talking ground zero of the copper country in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So I'm going to say goodbye, but I'm going to hold the camera up and do some quick pans so you can get a view of what I'm seeing as I'm talking to you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.